Today, we're sharing some of the darker stories from the entire year based on what you guys watch the most. There's something for everyone today, so hope you all enjoy it and have a happy and safe new year to come. Welcome to Scary Mysteries. Here are the strangest murder mysteries of the year, 2025. Number 10. The Brown's Chicken Massacre. It was a bitterly cold January evening in 1993 when the small suburb of Palatine, Illinois became the stage for a brutal crime. There, inside the Brown's Chicken and Pasta restaurant, the quiet hum of closing routines gave way to chaos, violence, and then ultimately silence. The 7 lives were taken that night, and for nearly a decade, the question hung heavy in the air: who did this and why? The victims included the restaurant's owners, Richard and Lynn Ellenfelt, a hardworking couple in their late 40s and early 50s who had spent years building their dream. Alongside them were 5 employees: Guadalupe Maldonado, a 46-year-old father, and Thomas Menz and Marcus Nelson, both in their early 30s, and 2 teenagers, Michael Castro and Rico Salas, who were only 16 and 17 years old. All 7 of them were wrangled up and marched into 2 separate walk-in fridges, and this is where their bodies would be found hours later. They were executed, one by one, before the culprit stole about $1,800 in cash. It was a ruthless crime, and the killers probably could have gotten the money without murdering anybody. It really wasn't that much. But instead, they took 7 lives. For Palatine, after this, life would never be the same. More than just the bodies, the killers left a trail of evidence that would take years to decipher. One of the most pivotal clues, though seemingly innocuous at first, was a piece of half-eaten chicken. It sat in the garbage, taken in as possible evidence.
Ultimately, the chicken is what saved us in terms of, we had the foresight to freeze that. And like I said, it took 6 years before we got the DNA, but it took another 3 years after that before we figured out whose DNA it was.
The investigation itself was relentless, but fruitless for nearly a decade. The families mourned, communities speculated, and the shadow of the crime loomed over the small town. Businesses suffered, and Brown's Chicken itself saw a staggering 35% drop in sales, eventually shuttering over 100 locations. And the restaurant where the massacre took place would be entirely demolished by 2001, a last-ditch effort to erase the horrors of that day 8 years ago. It wasn't until March of 2002 that a breakthrough came, and it arrived in the form of a confession, one not made by the killers themselves, but by an ex-girlfriend. Ann Lockett, the former partner of James Degorski, came forward with a messed-up revelation, as she implicated Degorski and his friend Juan Luna in the murders. Luna, a former employee of Brown's Chicken, had a familiarity with the restaurant's layout that made the crime disturbingly calculated. The pair had reportedly committed the murders, not out of necessity, but just for the thrill of it, which tracks since there was no need to do what they did. When investigators revisited the evidence after this confession, they turned to that half-eaten piece of chicken. Advancements in DNA technology had come a long way since the early 90s, and this time, the chicken gave up its secret. A DNA match to Juan Luna. It was the crack in the case that everybody needed. In May of 2002, nearly a decade after the killings, police arrested Luna and Degorski. Their confessions, while contested in court, had Luna admitting to participating in the murders, while Degorski's tape confession echoed his partner's narrative. And both cried they had been coerced into confessing, but the DNA evidence and corroborating testimony from Lockett and another woman, Eileen Bacala, sealed their fates. Luna's trial in 2007 ended with a guilty verdict for all 7 murders. Despite calls for the death penalty, a single juror's dissent saved him from execution, and so he got life instead. Degorski faced trial in 2009 and was also convicted of all 7 counts of first-degree murder. His sentencing mirrored Luna's, life behind bars with no chance of parole. Today, Both men sit in the Stateville Correctional Center, and their lives confined to a prison cell after just wanting to feel the thrill of taking people's lives. Number 9. The Mystery of Rebecca Corium. Cruise ships are essentially floating resorts, and they're supposed to be places where people can escape to when they're looking for a little R&R. But in March of 2011, a 24-year-old British woman named Rebecca Corium stepped onto the Disney Wonder as a crew member and never returned. But what happened in the hours before her disappearance has fueled one of the darkest mysteries the cruise industry has ever faced. Rebecca was from Chester, England, and had landed what many considered a dream job, working as a youth activities counselor for Disney Cruise Lines. And she loved travel and loved working with kids, and by all accounts, she was outgoing and full of life, and had a strong bond with her family back home. On March 21st of 2011, the Wonder left Los Angeles for a week-long cruise to the Mexican Riviera, Puerto Vallarta, Cabo San Lucas, all the spots tourists would want to go. Everything was going well. However, the next morning, early at around 5:45 a.m., Rebecca was captured on the ship's internal CCTV system. She was in the crew area, wearing men's clothing and speaking on one of the internal phones. And to this day, investigators have never revealed who she was calling. What's chilling about this footage is her demeanor. According to those who've seen it, she looked upset, distraught even. And at one point, she tucks her hair behind her ears as if trying to collect herself. After hanging up, she walks away, and that's the last confirmed sighting of Rebecca Corium. When she failed to show up for her morning shift, crew members started searching. And by 9 a.m., the announcement came. Will Rebecca Corium please report to guest services? But she never did. Then every crew member was ordered into a room for a full head count, and Rebecca was the only one who didn't show. And so then, somewhere between 5:45 a.m. and 9 a.m., she vanished. The official story put forward by Disney and Bahamian investigators, since the ship was registered in the Bahamas, was that Rebecca had been swept overboard from Deck 5, possibly by a rogue wave. They pointed to a pair of flip-flops found near a crew pool as evidence, but her family never believed it. And for one, those flip-flops weren't even hers. They were too big, and crewmates later said they recognized them as belonging to somebody else. More importantly, Deck 5 wasn't a place she would normally go at that hour, and if she had, the railings were high, and the seas that day, they were calm. In other words, to be swept overboard would have been almost impossible. Adding to the suspicion was Disney's handling of the whole case. The Bahamian investigator assigned, he only spent a single day on the ship. Rebecca's family was then flown out to see the Wonder with their own eyes in Los Angeles, but Disney kept them heavily restricted, escorted, of course, at all times. And they were also not shown that CCTV footage right away, and crew members were reportedly warned not to speak about what happened, so Disney could keep up its squeaky clean image. Other troubling details emerged from there. Rebecca had apparently been in an on-again, off-again relationship with a female crew member, and some suggested she may have been under stress about it. Others believe she may have witnessed or been involved in something she wasn't supposed to see, so somebody got rid of her. Now, to this day, no body has ever been recovered, and no one has put together the full story of what exactly happened. And if you ask her family, well, they're convinced there's a cover-up going on.
We automatically assumed as well that the authorities would get on board the ship when it docked, but they didn't. It's not their jurisdiction. That's when we started thinking, what's something not right here? And then we started realising it comes under flags of convenience and where the ship is registered.
And the truth is that cruise ships sail under what some call flags of convenience. often registered in countries with lax oversight. When a crime or disappearance happens at sea, jurisdiction becomes murky, and investigations can be shallow at best. And no one knows who really is in charge, and no jurisdiction wants the stress to fall on them. In the case of Rebecca Corium, it's a devastating example of this. For her family, the uncertainty is torture, and for the rest of us, Rebecca's disappearance stands as a reminder that sometimes, even in the happiest places on earth, well, darkness lurks just out of sight. Number 8. Who killed Alonzo? On April 3rd, 2004, 23-year-old Alonzo Brooks made a last-minute decision to join some friends at a party in rural Lacine, about an hour outside his home in Gardner, Kansas. It wasn't exactly his crowd or his hometown, but he figured, why not? So, as many of us would, Alonzo got a ride from a friend and showed up ready to have a good time. It was a big gathering, so worth the drive it seemed. There were about 100 people at this shindig, a mix of teens and young adults. And almost immediately, Alonzo stood out. Not just because he was one of the only black men at the party, but because some guests didn't seem happy he was there. Friends later said there were some unflattering comments thrown his way. A few attendees reportedly used slurs, and the vibe shifted in the place. Alonzo got separated from his friends, one of whom left, mistakenly thinking someone else would give him a ride home, but no one did. And that was the last time anyone saw the young man alive. The next day, Alonzo's family panicked when they realized he hadn't come home. They called his friends, and when they had no answers, they then called the police. A search began, but right away, things started feeling a little bit off. According to the Brooks family, law enforcement seemed indifferent about the whole situation. Search efforts were slow, while Alonzo's boots and hat were found on the side of the road near the party house. There were no other clues.
The FBI continues to investigate to find out if Alonzo may have been the victim of a hate crime. According to some witnesses at the party, Alonzo was threatened and was the target of racial slurs.
The FBI eventually joined in, but by then weeks had passed. And then, almost exactly 1 month later on May 1st, Alonzo's body was discovered. And when his family said the police weren't pulling their weight, they weren't kidding. His body wasn't found by the cops, but by them, in a creek just 650 feet from the house where the party took place. And something even stranger is that this area had already been searched multiple times supposedly by authorities. So, how'd they miss him? I mean, was his body moved? Had someone perhaps hidden him for some time? An autopsy, they hoped, could help determine a cause of death, but there were no broken bones, no visible signs of trauma, no drugs or alcohol in his system. And so officially, the case went cold. Just one of those strange incidents that happens in this world that have no full explanation. And for 16 years, the Brooks family pushed for justice, as they believed Alonzo had been the victim of a hate crime, that someone or multiple people had attacked him that night. But there were no witnesses who came forward, and no arrests, just rumors and the pain of the unanswered questions. In 2020, though, everything changed. And Netflix released an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, featuring Alonzo's case, and suddenly the public was paying attention again.
This is the family of Alonzo Brooks setting up a watch party for a new Netflix crime series called Official Unsolved Mysteries that features his story.
The FBI reopened the investigation. Alonzo's body was exhumed for a second autopsy. The reward for information was set at $100,000. In April of 2021, the FBI publicly announced what Alonzo's family had known all along. His death was now ruled a homicide. That second autopsy revealed injuries to his body that were not consistent with normal decomposition or an accidental death. Someone had hurt him, and somebody killed him. But here's where it gets maddening. No one has been arrested, and not a single suspect has been named. Authorities believe multiple people know what happened, and they're banking on someone breaking their silence. The FBI even stated that the passage of time can provide a new perspective. In other words, they're hoping guilt may finally outweigh fear, and we all do too. Number 7. Holly Brannigan. On March 28, 1979, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, 17-year-old Holly Brannigan is inside her family's home, talking with a friend on the telephone. There was a knock at her door, so she said she'd call back and hung up the phone. That was the last time anyone would speak with a high school senior ever again. More than 11 hours later, Holly's younger brother Sean made a horrifying discovery. And there on the kitchen floor, lying in a pool of blood, was Holly, with a large kitchen knife still embedded in her back. And this crime had all the elements of a horror film. A popular teenager brutally killed in her own home, a killer who got away, and a grieving father in Richard, who was already a widower, would be dealt another crushing blow, and just months later, Sean was also killed in a gas station explosion. And 2 children gone, a family wiped out, and a case that would go ice cold. Yet for over 40 years, Holly's case has been anything but forgotten. The internet has given new life into the mystery as armchair detectives dissect all the details, and true crime forums have lit up with theories. And so much so that even today, police are still receiving tips in the case. But from the very beginning, mistakes were made. When Holly's body was found, officers flooded the scene, some of whom had no business even being there. And after all, in a quiet town like Bethlehem, things like this didn't happen very often. And so, traffic officers, detectives, even the coroner descended upon the scene. Most of them didn't wear gloves, and pretty quickly, evidence was moved, chairs repositioned, objects picked up and placed back down. It wasn't intentional by any means, but it was dumb. And back then, DNA analysis was non-existent. The investigative process typically relied on blood typing, fingerprints, and good old-fashioned interviews. And since the day of the crime, the knife that ended Holly's life has been tested for DNA, but forensic breakthroughs have led to nothing. The fingerprints at the scene have been re-examined, but no matches to anybody have come up. And evidence that was stored improperly has also deteriorated over the years.
We were really trying to see if we could extract some DNA from the knife, and we sent the knife back down to the FBI lab in, I think it was Virginia, but we were unable to do that.
So while the trail has officially gone cold, the interesting part of this case is that authorities believe they actually know who killed Holly. They just can't prove it. They have a suspect, the person they strongly believe was responsible, but the problem is the evidence is only circumstantial. And with each passing year, that suspect, who has never been named, remains free. At one point in the case, investigators considered 6 potential suspects. They were males and females, classmates and neighbors, and one by one, all of them were ruled out, except for one. And for decades, rumors swirled about a grandfather clock frozen at the moment of Holly's death, 5:20. And this is one of those details the internet loves to look into, but in the end, it isn't necessarily anything. The clock in question was actually a small cuckoo clock in the kitchen. Investigators don't know if it stopped at 5:20 a.m. or p.m., and it also might have nothing to do with the murder at all. But over the years, the story took on a life of its own, adding to the eerie mystery of Holly's final moments. And as for her father, well, justice was something he had to just let go of. He remarried years later and did what he could to move on, but he never stopped searching for justice.
And get some conclusion as to what went on. And that's really all I'm looking for. When I go, and that's it. Maybe when I go, I'll find out the answer upstairs.
When Richard passed away in 2016, he still didn't know who took his daughter's life. And to this day, Holly's case is one of 35 unsolved homicides in Northampton County. Detectives hold on to hope that someone, somewhere knows the truth and will either come forward one day or perhaps even slip up. Every single year I tell myself I'm going to be thoughtful with gifts, and then somewhere around the 22nd, I end up ordering some gift cards for someone, pretending that's what I meant to buy all along. Well, this year, I skipped the panic and went straight for something that actually feels like it came from me, an aura frame. And gift giving can be hard because those people closest to you, well, they're the ones you want to get right. That's why the aura frame works. You can fill it with the photos you know they'll smile at, old ones, new ones, all the little moments you forgot you even had on your phone. And the setup is simple. Unlimited free photos and videos. You just download the Aura app, connect the frame to Wi-Fi, and you can send anything to it with one tap. You can even personalize the gift before it arrives, so when they open the box, there's a message waiting for them. So if you're done pretending that last-minute panic is part of the tradition, this is the upgrade. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver Mat frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code SCARY at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code SCARY. Now, this deal is exclusive to listeners and frames sell out fast, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout, and terms and conditions apply. Number 6. The Strange Death of Morgan.
Is it possible that she accidentally overdosed?
No. You know how many drugs were in her body? There were drugs that we never had in our house. She could have gone into our cabinet anytime.
They say your home is where you're supposed to feel the safest. But what happens when it becomes a cage and the threat is just outside your window? On the morning of December 2nd, 2011, in the mountain town of Carbondale, Colorado, Steve and Tony Ingram woke up to find their 20-year-old daughter Morgan lying lifeless in her bed. And there had been no screams in the night, nor signs of break-in, and none of it made sense. The Garfield County coroner's initial report was clear: natural causes. They said Morgan had died in her sleep from a rare genetic disorder, acute intermittent porphyria, a disease known for causing seizures, confusion, and intense abdominal pain. But the thing about it is, she had never been diagnosed with the disease, so her parents pushed back. And they pushed hard enough because 8 months later, the official cause of death changed. Suddenly, Morgan's death wasn't being labeled a medical mystery anymore. Now it was ruled an overdose of amitriptyline, a powerful prescription antidepressant. Was it accidental or intentional? Well, that would take more investigating. But still, there was a problem with this, because Morgan wasn't taking that medication. Her parents immediately pushed back again. They weren't just grieving parents in denial. They had reason to believe their daughter had actually been murdered, and they believed they know who did it. Morgan was 20 years old at the time, a former ballet dancer and passionate about photography, animals, and family. She was sensitive, curious, and according to her parents, full of life. There were no medical issues and no signs of depression. What there was, though, was something darker. A 4-month-long campaign of fear that her parents say culminated in her death, and they say Morgan was being stalked. According to the Ingrams, it started with tapping on the windows at night, then shadows lurking outside the house. Eventually, Morgan began keeping a diary, documenting every strange occurrence, every incident that made her feel hunted. Security cameras were then installed, lights, motion sensors, and even police reports, dozens of them. But according to the family, law enforcement never took it seriously. And Morgan began sleeping with a knife underneath her pillow. And she stopped going out, and her parents said she was terrified, not depressed. And then she was gone. When Tony found her daughter that morning, she said Morgan didn't look peaceful, like someone who had drifted off to sleep. She claims there were bruises on her body, blood around her mouth, and signs, she says, of a struggle. but those observations were never formally documented in the autopsy. But there was a toxic dose of that antidepressant in her system. That can't be denied. So, where did it come from? Well, Steve and Tony insist Morgan hadn't taken that medication in over a year. And they claim it wasn't in the house. Was it secretly administered to her, planted somehow, or had Morgan really taken it herself? As public interest in the case grew, so did the theories. Was Morgan suffering from something her parents didn't fully understand? Or had she been slowly unraveled by fear and by the constant anxiety of being watched, followed, and hunted? Some have even suggested both could be true, but the trauma of being stalked drove her to being in that terrible headspace. But others point to something more sinister, that her stalker just finally got to her. And Tony and Steve believe the man who had been harassing their daughter for months found a way inside the house that night. They think he drugged her and killed her, and possibly without leaving a trace. And in the years since, they've taken their fight public, posting on blogs and speaking to media, even appearing on national TV. And their goal, ultimately, is to get Morgan's case reopened as a homicide. As to whether or not that will happen, only time will tell. Number 5. The Mystery of Wanda Mays. In May of 1986, a young woman vanished from a home on Georgia Mountain in Alabama. What was left behind was hard to piece together. Blood on shattered glass, a torn nightgown by the water's edge, and a canoe drifting across the lake, empty except for more blood. And for 2 decades, her family was left wondering whether Wanda had been abducted, drowned, or perhaps stumbled into something much darker. Her story begins, like many others, an ordinary evening, a family dinner and a last-minute decision to stay with relatives. But by dawn, Wanda was gone. The questions surrounding her disappearance would haunt investigators to this day. Wanda was born on August 19th, 1959, in Panama, where her father served in the military. Her childhood stretched across Arkansas, Alabama, and Texas before she eventually settled in Arab, Alabama. By 1986, she was 26 years old, college graduate and working as a secretary at Redstone Arsenal, a U.S. Army post. But beneath the surface, Wanda was struggling. Her family later said that she'd been battling a chemical imbalance linked to dieting, which left her emotionally unstable. Panic attacks would strike without warning, leaving her terrified. On the night of May 11th, Wanda had dinner with her parents before heading to the home of her aunt and uncle, Tyrese and Betty Dorman, who lived near Gunnersville Lake. Instead of driving back to her apartment that night, though, she decided to spend the night right there in their guest room. The Dorman said she went to bed around 10:30 p.m. That would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. At 5 a.m., when they tried to wake her, they found the guest bedroom locked, but no answer. After forcing the door, that's when they discovered the disturbing scene. The bed hadn't been slept in. Wanda's belongings were still neatly on the nightstand, but the window, double-paned Venetian glass, had been shattered from the inside. Drops of blood trailed across the frame, and no one in the house reported hearing a thing, but clearly a thing happened. Outside, the trail continued. Behind the house on the shore of the lake, searchers discovered Wanda's blood-stained nightgown. Nearby, an empty canoe floated across the water, and inside were more blood, later matched to Wanda's blood type. It appeared like she had fallen overboard, perhaps. And while investigators scrambled to make sense of all this, reports started to come in that literally muddied the waters. That very same morning, a motorist claimed to have seen a young woman resembling Wanda walking along State Route 62. She wore oversized jeans, her hair dripping wet, as if she had just been out swimming. The following day, 30 miles away in Huntsville, another witness said she spotted Wanda in the back of a car with 2 unidentified men at a convenience store. The witness thought the woman looked scared. Moments later, she saw her again, this time at a payphone under the watchful eye of one of those men.
It stuck in my mind because she didn't belong with them. They were very rough-looking guys, and she looked frightened. She looked like she was trying to get my attention.
And not knowing if the sightings were in fact real, the authorities had to rule things out one by one. They extensively searched the lake for her body, but turned up nothing. The blood in the canoe deepened suspicions. I mean, was it part of an accident, or had Wanda been attacked? Marshall County investigators brought in homicide specialist Edward Teal, who later called it the most mysterious case he'd ever seen. Despite national exposure through unsolved mysteries, the trail went cold.
I believe Wanda's alive. Jim and I pray together for Wanda every night. And I believe that God is honoring that prayer and that we will get Wanda back.
Her family always clung to hope, but as years passed, the absence of answers only made her disappearance more haunting. And then, 17 years later, in October of 2003, a hiker foraging for ginseng stumbled upon human bones at the base of a 150-foot cliff less than 2 miles from the Dorman home. And those remains sat unidentified for 5 years until DNA testing in 2008 confirmed what the maze finally had long feared. It was Wanda. The authorities ruled her death accidental. They concluded she had fallen from the cliff after leaving the house in a state of panic. Now, for some, the ruling was unsatisfying. How did her nightgown end up torn and bloody by the lake? Why was there so much blood in the canoe? And what about those eyewitness accounts that suggested she had been alive after her disappearance? Her brother John accepted the findings, pointing to Wanda's history of sudden, overwhelming panic attacks. To him, broken glass and her frantic escape from the house fit a tragic pattern. But still, as to what exactly went down that night in '86, well, nobody really knows for sure. Number 4. Indonesia's most gruesome cold case. Jakarta, November 23, 1981. The Monday morning rush was just beginning along one of the busiest streets in South Jakarta. Office workers hurried past vendors, and traffic police directed the endless flow of cars. And on the sidewalk, across from the Wisma Arthaloka building, 2 cardboard boxes sat unattended. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, the kind of boxes you might see discarded after a delivery, so people just walked past them like it was no big deal. And it wasn't, at least from the outside. But for 2 security guards in the area, something about them wasn't right. As the sun continued to rise, these boxes started to give off a foul, almost overpowering stench, and flies swarmed around the seams. The guards approached a traffic policeman nearby and told him what they found, but he was busy directing traffic and waved them off. So the boxes stayed there, baking under the late morning heat. Sometime later, 2 unhoused individuals sifting through trash made their way to this part of the town, and curious, just like Brad Pitt, they wondered, well, what's in the box? What they found inside would be the start of one of the most gruesome and enduring mysteries in Indonesia's criminal history. In the first box lay 13 cleanly severed bones and a human head. The flesh had been stripped from the bones, but the head was strangely intact. Eyes closed, features undamaged, almost as if the victim were just sleeping. The second box held something worse, 180 pieces of human flesh, meticulously cut and packed. Internal organs, a lung, a liver, a spleen were stacked inside, and certain parts were missing entirely, the bladder and pancreas. This wasn't some random frenzied killing. This took a lot of time and care. Forensic pathologist Dr. Munam Idris was called in to perform the autopsy. He was no stranger to violent crime scenes, but later said this was the most brutal case he had ever handled. The victim was a male about 18 to 21 years old, around 5'6", with a sturdy, slightly overweight build. And he had been stabbed multiple times with wounds to the chest, back, and abdomen. Within 24 hours of death, his body had been submerged in water, and the skin on his fingertips was still wrinkled like a drowning victim's. And every bone was scraped clean, and every piece of flesh washed free of blood, suggesting the mutilation was done in a bathroom or a similar setting. Dr. Idris likened the cuts to those used in preparing a kambing guling, a spit-roasted goat. The precision and systematic nature suggested skill and time. Police believe more than one person was involved, and that the process took several hours to complete, meaning they had privacy. Despite the brutality, the killer had left behind details that should have made identification of the victim possible. The fingerprints were there, intact palms and soles, even that face. When police ran the prints, nothing ever came back. For days after the discovery, hundreds of people came forward, hoping or fearing to identifying the victim as a missing loved one. But every lead collapsed and nobody recognized the guy. On November 27th, the body was then buried in Tegal Alor Cemetery in West Jakarta, laid to rest without a name. The case became known as Setiabudi 13, after the district where it was found and the 13 pieces of bone recovered from the first box. It is considered Indonesia's first modern mutilation case, and even after more than 4 decades, it remains one of the most disturbing. Whoever the killers were, they not only got away with murder, they erased their victim's identity. And unless someone comes forward with the truth, that's likely the way it will stay forever. Number 3. Shaw Creek Killer. Aiken County, South Carolina. A place where not a whole lot goes down. A lot of woods where pines sway in the breeze. But between 1986 and 1993, something evil was happening here, and the victims were being hidden in those forests. 4 women, abandoned, nude, and forgotten, dumped near the same stretch of water, and whoever did it vanished without a trace and has never been caught. In September of 1987, 2 hunters were making their way through a patch of woods near Shaw Creek when they saw what they thought was an animal carcass in the brush. And as they moved closer, well, that thought changed fast. It was a body of a woman, and she was badly decomposed, skeletal really. There was nothing on her to tell police who she was. She didn't even have any clothes on her. Investigators estimated she had been there for years, anywhere from 1 to 5, and because of that, they couldn't even say how she died. It was disturbing, no question, but at the time, police didn't realize this was just the beginning. Because over the next few years, the pattern would repeat itself again and again. In 1991, a man was out walking when he stumbled across another woman's body, again near Shaw Creek. Now, this one was finally identified in 1999 as 30-year-old Jackie Council, a mother of 4 who had vanished in November of '86. Then came Ristine Durden in 1992, and she'd been reported missing in 1989 from Augusta, Georgia. Her remains were also found along Shaw Creek, dumped, nude, and left to rot on the forest floor. And finally, in 1993, a 4th body was found. Now, this woman still hasn't been identified. Her remains have been burned. The fire was deliberate, an attempt to erase who she was. All women were of African American descent. They were all dumped in that specific remote area, all found nude, and they were all around 25 to 32 years old. So what kind of killer does this, and why Shaw Creek? Well, is it just convenient for them? Maybe they were a local. Or did that location mean something to him? The FBI was called in and they did what they could. They took soil samples, looked over all the old bone fragments, and even insect activity, trying to find the cause of death, but the evidence had mostly been erased. There was one potential link. Some of the women were known to have struggled with drugs. One victim tested positive for cocaine. Another may have been engaged in prostitution. But could the killer have been someone who thought these women wouldn't be missed? Or worse, someone who thought they deserved it? The authorities looked into local men, mostly guys with a criminal track record for violent offenses, those who have served time. But in the end, it was just grasping at straws and nothing ever stuck. For a minute, they floated around the idea that maybe this wasn't the work of one person. They thought, what if Shaw Creek became the dumping ground for multiple predators, all just taking advantage of the same remote corridor? But the similarities between the victims is hard to ignore. And most think this was the work of a single individual. And by 1994, this case went cold. The unnamed Jane Doe found in '93 still hasn't been identified, and there were no new discoveries along Shaw Creek. So did the killer actually stop? It's possible. He might have moved, he might have died, or he might still be out there in the same exact place. And there might just be more bodies yet to be discovered. Number 2, the hunt for Farian Wardrip. Between 1984 and '86, a terror quietly bloomed across North Texas. A predator who didn't just stalk his victims, he studied them, waiting for the right moment to strike. His name was Farian Wardrip, and for 2 years, he was every young woman's worst nightmare. Wardrip was an imposing figure, standing 6'6" and weighing in at around 220 pounds, so pretty easily he could take control of any woman he wanted. He wasn't a drifter or truck-driving killer. He spent his days working as a hospital janitor, and there he got to see many ladies come and go, and some of them he became fascinated with. On December 21st of '84 in Wichita Falls, Texas, Terry Sims, 20-year-old student and part-time EKG specialist, thought she was just spending the night at a friend's apartment. That evening, Wardrip had been lurking outside, peeping in through the windows. As Sims heard him at one point, cracked open the door to see what was going on. That's all it took. When she fled back inside, Wardrip simply kicked down the door. He overpowered her tiny frame, binding her with an electrical cord before assaulting and then stabbing her to death. And Terry fought hard, but it wasn't enough against a man twice her size. When her friend returned hours later, she found the poor girl lying in a pool of blood on the bathroom floor. Police preserved DNA and a fingerprint from the crime scene, but with no suspect, the case went cold, and Wardrip vanished into the night. And just weeks later, on January 19th, another young woman would cross his path, and Tony Gibbs, 23-year-old registered nurse, and barely over 5 feet tall, weighing just 94 pounds. And Gibbs offered a familiar co-worker, Wardrip, a ride early one morning after a night shift, and that was a fatal mistake. Instead of letting her drop him off, the man forced her down an isolated dirt road. In the middle of nowhere, near an abandoned school bus, he assaulted her, stabbed her 8 times, and left her to die. And Tony incredibly survived the initial attack, and she got out of the car and managed to crawl over 100 feet towards the road looking for help before succumbing to her injuries in a desolate field. And her body was found weeks later. Her abandoned car was discovered just days later, parked near Wardrip's own apartment. Yet again, the big man escaped suspicion. March 24th of '85 in Fort Worth, a new city, but the same nightmare. And Wardrip met 25-year-old Deborah Taylor at a bar where her husband had left earlier that night because they had a fight. He offered her a ride home, which she accepted, and when she rejected his advances, he snapped. Her body was later found dumped at a construction site, and for years police suspected her husband, despite him passing multiple polygraph tests. It destroyed his life, while Wardrip quietly walked free. September 20th, back in Wichita Falls, Wardrip struck again. And this time, 21-year-old Ellen Blah was targeted as she walked to her car after her evening shift as a waitress. He abducted her and drove her to a remote location and strangled her to death. He left her body to rot in a field, abandoned her blood-stained car in town, and disappeared into the crowd like he had done so many times before. It took 3 weeks before her decomposed remains were found, and by then, she could only be identified through dental records. The last known victim before his first arrest came on May 6th of '86. It was 21-year-old Tina Kimbrough, a waitress he'd recently befriended. Wardrip showed up at her apartment uninvited, and there he smothered her with a pillow, claiming she reminded him of his ex-wife.
When the rage and all the violence was occurring, I saw her eyes, I saw her face, I screamed how much I hated her.
Witnesses saw a man matching his description leaving the apartment complex. A few days later, Wardrip, racked by a mix of guilt and desperation, called police from a payphone in Galveston, threatening to unalive himself. When they arrived, he then confessed. But the confession only scratched the surface. And sentenced to 35 years in prison for Tina's murder, Wardrip served less than a third of it. By 1997, he was out on parole, walking free, wearing only an ankle monitor to restrict his movements. He remarried, found God, and became a model citizen in tiny Olney, Texas. It wasn't until 1999 that Detective John Little, reviewing the cold cases of Sims, Gibbs, and Blah, made a chilling discovery. DNA from 2 of the old crime scenes matched each other, and when Little dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Wardrip wasn't just a one-off killer, he had ties to all 3 women. But the big man had never submitted DNA after his early conviction. Back then, there was no mandatory offender database, so Little got creative. During a casual encounter, he asked Wardrip for a coffee cup he was drinking from, claiming he needed it to spit tobacco. Wardrip handed it over, none the wiser, and then tests confirmed it. Wardrip was the man who had terrorized North Texas years earlier. Under questioning, he cracked and confessed to it all. Each murder had been meticulously planned, yet spontaneous. He had stalked the women he could overpower, and today, at 66 years old, Wardrip sits on death row. Number 1. The Pond and the Barrel.
The next morning, Debbie should have been at work. Debbie did not go to work. It wasn't like Debbie at all.
The day after Christmas is supposed to feel slow and sweet, full of leftovers, family, and quiet time. But for 28-year-old nurse Debbie Wolf, December 26th of 1985 would be the last day anyone ever saw her alive. She clocked out of work at 4 p.m., smiled to her coworkers, and drove off toward her cozy cabin, nestled 7 miles outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. Nothing unusual, but by the next morning, Debbie had simply vanished. Her parents, John and Jenny, knew immediately that something wasn't right. And Debbie was the type of person who didn't just miss work. He was responsible to a fault. When she failed to show up at the hospital, her family and a friend, Kevin Gorton, drove out to her cabin to check on her. And what they found there shattered any hope that this was just a misunderstanding. Debbie's beloved dogs were unfed, whining and pacing. Her car was parked oddly, not where she normally left it. Empty beer cans littered the property, even though Debbie wasn't much of a drinker. Inside her home, it looked ransacked in a way that didn't fit her personality. Her nurse's uniform was crumpled on the kitchen floor, her purse shoved hastily under the bed. And then came something even more creepy. A message on her answering machine left earlier that day from a man claiming Debbie hadn't showed up to work for quote-unquote days. But that was a lie. Debbie had just worked the day before. When Jenny tried to report her daughter missing, authorities brushed her off, telling her she had to wait 72 hours. Precious time slipped away. It wasn't until December 31st, 5 days after she had vanished, that the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office finally opened an investigation. Bloodhounds found nothing. Police combed the area, but strangely, didn't bother to search the pond just yards away from Debbie's cabin.
I think it was mentioned that they had already looked in the pond. There was no use for us to look in the pond, so I don't think we did a dive of the pond or a complete search of the pond on that day. No, we did not.
Her mother didn't trust the authorities, who weren't acting with any sort of urgency, so she took matters into her own hands. On New Year's Day, Jenny brought in 2 civilian divers, Kevin Gordon and a trained search and rescue diver named Gordon Childress. Within minutes of slipping into the murky water, Gordon found something. 2 sets of footprints at the bottom of the pond, drag marks, and then a barrel placed on top of something. And that something was Debbie Wolf's body. Now, the police in a town like this didn't like being one-upped by some guys outside the department, but they questioned whether she was even found under the barrel. Instead of treating the scene like a potential homicide, they then treated it like an accident from the start. An autopsy confirmed Debbie hadn't been drinking or using drugs. The cause of death was ruled drowning, so case closed for the authorities, who theorized Debbie must have fallen into the pond while playing with her dogs. But nothing about that explanation sat right with those who knew her. For one, let's pretend she had accidentally drowned like that. And typically victims under these circumstances will pass away with their eyes and mouths open, arms outstretched, twisted in desperation. And Debbie's body wasn't like that. Her eyes were closed, her limbs relaxed. Her body looked suspiciously clean, as if she hadn't thrashed around in the slimy pond water at all. On top of that, Kevin and Gordon both swore Debbie had been inside that barrel. Debbie's neighbors remembered a barrel near the cabin before her disappearance, but after she vanished, the barrel vanished too. All that was left was a telltale indentation in the dirt where it had once sat. Yet investigators insisted there was never a barrel at all.
What appeared to be a barrel to some of the divers could have been the field jacket, which may have ballooned out as she was laying at that angle at the bottom of the pond.
Then months after Debbie's death, Jenny got a closer look at the clothing and belongings found on her daughter. And those clothes she wore that day didn't belong to Debbie at all. The pants were several sizes too large, and the jacket wasn't hers. The bra was 3 cup sizes too big. The shoes were 3 sizes too large. With all the strange pieces of evidence, Jenny and her family came to a grim conclusion. Debbie had been held against her will and then killed. As for who might have done it, well, Jenny had 2 suspects in mind. Both were hospital volunteers who had made Debbie uncomfortable in the weeks leading up to her death. One was a man with a long history of psychiatric issues who had aggressively pursued Debbie, even threatening to come to her home after obtaining her phone number. The police questioned him, but he refused a polygraph and skipped town shortly after. And the second was another volunteer who had tried to start a romantic relationship with Debbie, and she had turned him down, and Jenny believes it was his voice on the eerie answering machine message that day. But again, police found no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. And so, officially, to this day, Debbie Wolf's death remains ruled as an accident. So they were the strangest murder mysteries of the year, 2025. Hope you all enjoyed it. And I've linked all the episodes where these stories came from below, so you can dig into those if you feel like doing a deeper dive. And from all of us here at Scary Mysteries, we're wishing you and yours a great and healthy new year. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you over in the next one.